speaker, we have Laura Hamill, the Chief People Officer and Managing Director at Limeade Institute. Laura leads the people team and is responsible for nurturing the Limeade culture. She worked on the Limeade founding team to develop the world's first and most comprehensive well-being assessment. Laura has 20 years of experience implementing research, assessment, and culture strategies in organizations. She earned her PhD in Industrial Organizational Psychology from Old Dominion University, and her Bachelor of Science is in Psychology from the University of North Carolina. So it is our pleasure to have Laura with us. So without any further delay, Laura, let's get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Alec. It's great to be here with you all today, and thanks so much to all of you who are participating. One detail I'd like to add about my bio that might be relevant here is I absolutely am focused on the human resources function here at Limeade, so I very much care about this topic from our own company's perspective. But heading up Limeade Institute, with Limeade Institute, we are actually studying well-being. So it's a pretty neat spot to be in a place where I'm studying something and trying to understand it conceptually and then actually applying it, which in many cases is way harder. All right. So let's talk a little bit about our agenda for today. So what we're covering is the business case for well-being, and we really think of this in two ways. So the first way is around conceptually, why should an organization care about well-being? We believe that there's a really important connection between well-being and employee engagement, and we want to talk about that more conceptually first. So that's a little bit more about the why of the business case. And then the second piece is a framework for thinking about the results you can achieve by focusing on employee well-being. And so that's a little bit more of the how. So we're going to be talking about the why and the how here today. Now, before we jump into that, I'd like you to do something. I'd like you to close your eyes. Take just one short minute and close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, I'd like you to think back to the last time you felt or you said to yourself, I love my life. So I love my life. So when we think about that feeling, right, a lot of times words that come to mind that describe that feeling are things like peaceful and thankful and excited or happy and positive. And this is really at the heart of the case for well-being. Don't we all want to feel that way? Don't we want other people to feel that way? And shouldn't we all really be striving to feel that way more often? This is really about having a high quality of life. And as organizations and working on these kinds of issues in organizations, isn't it really about people in your organization having a great life? So as we start digging into things that feel a little bit more metrics related, that really are focused on this business case for well-being, let's not forget about kind of fundamentally why we care about well-being. And it's the idea that we want more and more people to have a high quality of life. All right, let's jump in. So a really simple model that we've created that explains why organizations should care about well-being is this thing we call the Great Company Model. So we start on the top right, and the idea is organizations that invest in well-being. And so when we say invest in well-being, it's not a simple task. It's not just about having a tool or a resource for individual employees. It's also about this thing we call organizational support for well-being. So just as important as having a tool or a process or a program, we believe that the organization plays a large role in supporting well-being. So that first piece is investing in well-being. And those organizations that do that have higher levels of employee engagement. And when we're talking about employee engagement, we're not talking about engagement with the program or participation or how many times they hit the website. What we're talking about is that deep connection, that sense of purpose that you can have at work that results in higher levels of energy and more commitment. So if you have then those higher levels of employee engagement, you get better business results. And this is where, this is probably a topic that's been studied more than any in the human resources space, is how important employee engagement is and how it's statistically related to really important business results like higher levels of innovation, better productivity, improved customer satisfaction. So employee engagement absolutely has been proven over and over again to be related to business results. And we think that if you have all three of those things, well-being, employee engagement, better business results, you're just going to be a great company to work for. So this is a conceptual idea behind the case for well-being, that it's really about linking to employee engagement and therefore better business results. So what we're going to do next is dig into this a little bit more. So just to start, obviously having a good definition is important. So what is well-being? Well-being really has two components. It's about feeling good and living with purpose. Now think about this idea of feeling good. Feeling good is, for sure, there's a physical component. There's a feeling good in your body component, but you also have to feel good in your head. You have to feel relatively stress-free. You have to feel positive and optimistic. So feeling good is a mind and a body idea. And then the second part is living with purpose. Living with purpose is about having a reason you really need to wake up every day, something that's intentional that you're doing with your life. It could be the people who rely on you, it could be a job, it could be a role you play. There's got to be a feeling in your life that you have a purpose. And it's really important that you need both of those things. So if you feel good without having purpose, you probably won't be fulfilled. But if you live with purpose without feeling good, you just can't sustain that. You can't keep focusing on waking up every day if you don't feel great. So one thing just to clarify, well-being is really different from wellness. Traditional wellness is about primarily physical health. And as you can see just by this definition, well-being is much broader than that. All right, so well-being is related to employee engagement. We've found this in some research that we've done, and also other organizations like Gallup and other consulting firms have definitely seen that there is a statistical relationship between employee well-being and employee engagement. So let me just spend a minute on this. The idea on this slide is based on some research that we did last year in partnership with Quantum Workplace. So we administered some research questions through Quantum Workplace's employee engagement platform. And what we found with this research is pretty interesting. We found that the people who participated really could be put into two groups. So the first group was a high well-being group, and the second group was a low well-being group. We looked then at their results on other items that we had administered. And what we found in this particular case is that if you rolled up all of the employee engagement items that were administered to this group, there was a big difference, and this is a statistically significant difference between those who had higher well-being and those who had lower well-being. Those with higher well-being were 88% favorable on those employee engagement items compared to those with lower well-being who were 50% favorable. So there seems to be something really interesting going on between these two groups. If you double-click into that a little bit, these are just some of the items that are underneath that. What we find is that those people with higher well-being enjoy their work more, they're more likely to say they're going to stay in the organization, they're more loyal to their teams, and they really recommend their company as a great place to work at higher rates than those with lower well-being. And you know, this, to me, don't we all want to feel this way about our work, right? Don't we really also want those people who we are working with to feel this way too? So there seems to be a real important thing going on between well-being and employee engagement. So what we believe is that if you really want to have more engaged employees, you have to invest in the well-being of your employees. It's not about doing more engagement surveys. It's maybe even not about doing more focus groups, and for sure it's not about some superficial things like ping pong tables or Margarita Mondays. It's really about fundamentally investing and authentically committing to the well-being of your employees. Another important concept within well-being is this idea of whole person well-being. The just basic premise here is that what happens in one part of your life absolutely impacts all other parts. That what happens in your head affects what happens in your body and vice versa. What happens at home affects what happens at work. What happens at work affects what happens at home. It's a pretty intuitive concept. We all know that it's really hard to compartmentalize something and push it over to the side. And, you know, even if you were really wanting to focus on one part of your well-being, so let's say you did want to focus on your physical well-being, you really probably need to understand what's upstream from that. So what are some of the root causes of any of the issues that you might have from a physical perspective? Because every aspect of a person is interrelated. You can really think about people as systems. And so it's hard to just focus on one thing without digging deep into those other aspects of their life. There's some interesting statistics around some of these ideas. So one of them is 50% of all illness in the United States has stress as a main contributor. And I think we all know that stress can come from a lot of different places, right? You could have financial stress, you could have relationship stress, you absolutely can have work stress. So it's really hard to just focus on physical health like traditional wellness programs do. What we know is that you can't really change or improve well-being unless you think about the whole person, and for sure you can't sustain that change. One example I always like to talk about is an example we use for a woman named Sarah. She's overweight, she has high blood pressure, and if you stopped right there, you might just think about her just from a physical health perspective. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you find out she's a single mom with 2 kids. She's completely struggling to make ends meet. She feels stuck in her job, and she recently interviewed for another job but didn't get it. So she's not sleeping very well, and she's definitely not eating right. Definitely doesn't feel like she has any time for herself. She's bummed, and she really feels hopeless, and she doesn't feel like she has any other job opportunities. So if we went to her right now and started focusing on her high blood pressure or her BMI, that would be really short-sighted. It wouldn't be thinking about Sarah as a person and really understanding the complexity of what's going on with Sarah. But if we went to her and perhaps helped Sarah with her job situation or with her stress, maybe that would feel like something that's helpful for her. So we know and believe with our evidence that we found in our research and other research that focusing on the whole person is really what matters. So if you want to have more engaged employees, you need to focus on the whole person. So far we've talked about how well-being is related to employee engagement and how important it is to think about the whole person. Now I'd like to talk about this idea of organizational support. Organizational support is the extent to which the organization really reinforces and encourages employees to focus on their well-being. And we believe, and we have some evidence, that organizations really must actively support well-being in order for it to improve and really to sustain it. So this model shows the important components of organizational support. And we've tested this model, and we found that each of these is significantly related to overall organizational support and also to well-being. So the things that are on the right, the components that are on the right, are things what we call more local support. So those are the people who are around that employee. So how does the manager talk to the employee about their well-being? Do they encourage them to take time for themselves? Do they fundamentally care about them as a whole person? How do the team and the peers that are around the employee support and encourage that person to take time for themselves or to focus on things that are important to them? Are there social networks or other social connections in the organization? Maybe there's a well-being champion network or affinity groups or employee resource groups that really help support that employee. What's the physical work environment like? Is there natural light? Can that employee make their physical space their own? Do they feel comfortable there? Does it feel like a positive place to work? And then if you move over to the left, those are the things that are maybe more organization-wide. Those are tools and programs that the organization might offer the employee to improve their well-being. And the next one is around strategic alignment. Is well-being really connected to some aspect of the business? Do we show employees that improving their well-being, focusing on well-being, really actually helps the organization achieve its business goals? What role do leaders play? Are they role models? Are they reinforcers? Are they helping people kind of be inspired to improve their well-being? And then finally, culture. How is the culture supporting well-being or working against it? Because it absolutely can. Just to kind of put a little kind of idea there, what we found in our research is one important aspect of culture is trust, and it's really bi-directional trust. So the organization has to trust its employees, and the employees have to trust the organization. So what we found is trust is a really important component of the culture that you need in order for well-being to be supported. So focusing on well-being is way more than just a tech platform or a program or a set of resources. It's just as important how the organization commits to supporting its employees. So what we know is that organizational support is key. I was telling you earlier about the two groups that we found in our research. There was a group that had high well-being and a group that had low well-being. And we decided in the research we did last year to dig a little deeper into that high well-being group. We wanted to find out what organizational support looked like for that high well-being group. And what we found is that high well-being participants tended to have higher levels of organizational support. So they were 72% favorable on saying that they also had high organizational support. And so then we looked at that high group, so high well-being and high org support, and looked at their responses on other items. And what we found is that high group was 99% favorable on saying their company was a great place to work. We also found that those employees were favorable on saying they were going to keep working in that company, so 91% favorable. Those are really high levels of favorability and also continue to lend some support and evidence for this great company model. So if you really want to have more engaged employees, you absolutely have to actively support their well-being. And it's a real commitment, but we know that it works, and there seems to be really important things that happen when you have both well-being and org support. All right, so we've been talking about this idea of employee engagement, and hopefully you see that conceptually, if we link well-being to employee engagement, it makes a lot of sense because employee engagement is absolutely related to better results. But let's just make sure we understand what is employee engagement. I've been really solving for employee engagement throughout this whole talk, so let's spend a little bit of time on this. So it's this concept of a deep connection and sense of purpose at work. And what's so neat about it is that it results in extra energy. You get excited about the work you're doing. You spend long hours thinking about things. Time flies by when you're really engaged at work. And you're also more committed to the organization. And what that means is that you go above and beyond. You do things that aren't on your job description. You see connections that maybe other people might not see. There's a real sense of being all in and being really excited about what you're working on. And what's neat about this is that it is a great thing for employees to be engaged. It feels good. It's also a great thing for the employer, as I've been talking about. The results are just better when you have an engaged workforce. So one of the things I wanted to kind of connect here is why fundamentally would well-being be related to employee engagement? So one piece of that is probably related to this idea of energy. So in order to be engaged at work, this energy has to be possible. So when you have well-being, maybe you have the ability to have more physical energy, maybe even more mental energy to be able to focus on your work. Also, another really important connection is this idea of sense of purpose. I was describing at the beginning the definition of well-being is really feeling like you have a reason to wake up, something that you're excited about in your life. And that really is about employee engagement. So sense of purpose, it can really come through at work, or it can be a primary driver of having a sense of purpose in life. So that's also a really important connection between well-being and employee engagement. Another idea is that if you feel valued and cared for in your organization, that you really then might have the opportunity to be engaged. So there's a connection there between feeling valued and cared for through well-being. So those people might be able to have the opportunity to recharge a little bit more. If their organization cares about them, maybe they can take a little time off after they've had a big project. Maybe also organizations might be thinking about the growth and development of those employees, or there might be more trust and empowerment in those situations. So well-being and employee engagement have some really interesting connection points that make you see why there is a strong relationship. All right, so if you really want to have more engaged employees, and hopefully you all do, and understand why it's a great thing for organizations, we believe that you must invest in well-being and focus on the concept of whole person well-being, and that the organization plays a huge role in actively supporting well-being. So now what I'd like to do is dig a little bit deeper into the actual areas that you might focus on if you are really building out a business case for well-being. So this is getting a little bit more to the how you might build a business case and what you might focus on. We have a model called the Limeade Results Model. And this is going to be public next week, and we thought we'd just share some of these concepts with you here today. So tying back to that great company model, you can see the concept of results on the third arrow. So this is sort of a click into that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about it overall, but then we'll go into each one of these. So we believe that as customers go through their well-being journey, their goals and needs change, and also they evolve in their sophistication really around this concept of well-being. So we really encourage our customers to work toward impacting business results. So ultimately on the right-hand side is where we want to get to with our well-being programs. Now traditional wellness programs tend to focus on the left-hand side. Many don't really go much further than talking about what percentage of people participated, what levels of achievement did they get to, are users satisfied with the program. But we think there's so many good reasons why you will need to work towards being more evolved in the value of a well-being program. So we think that employees, when they love a program and they actually use it, so starting on the left-hand side, they start changing behaviors. They start getting better habits, more consistent habits. And then they're going to report higher levels of well-being. When they do that, you're going to get better people results and then ultimately better business results. All right, so program results. You can measure this by registration, achievement levels, whether or not they use other programs, ongoing participation. There's a lot of different ways to measure program success, but we're really trying to make sure people are getting into it, doing the things that we think are the basics or the fundamental parts of the program, and that they like it and really maybe even love it and want to keep using it. So that's sort of, again, just sort of the baseline, just a place to start. So then do they start changing their behavior? Do they have new habits that get created? Are people gaining, making new commitments? Are they starting to do things more consistently? Do they maintain lifestyle changes or changes in behavior? So they can be measured through, how they might think differently about stress, how they might have practiced some gratitude in their life, whether or not they reframe things and try to be more optimistic. Do they have better habits around nutrition and exercise? Do they seek out professional development? Do they seek out feedback? So we think that habits and recurring behaviors is the next step after participation in the program. Next is well-being. And this is measured by overall well-being, but also there are 4 components that we think are really important. So work well-being, emotional well-being, physical, and financial. And one of the things that's really important to understand about well-being, because it's about feeling good and living with purpose, is that this is fundamentally subjective. So nobody can tell somebody else what their well-being is. There aren't these perfect objective measures of well-being. So it's really important, though, that we study this and understand how people feel about their well-being, because the way they feel about it absolutely is predictive of other important outcomes. So measuring these overall perceptions of well-being is an important part of a measurement program. The next component of the Limeade Results Model is people. So I've been talking a lot about employee engagement and measuring employee engagement, but there are other things that could be important from a people perspective, like turnover or safety, or thinking about attracting people into your organizations and the costs of recruiting, their costs of replacement. So there are a lot of different people metrics that we've found through our research are related to well-being. And then the last one is business results. This can be measured by sales, it can be measured by customer satisfaction, things like growth rate, safety, innovation. So our well-being and program participation, are they really impacting these kinds of business outcomes? And that's what we think is ultimately important for organizations to connect to. So let's not just end with, do people participate in the program? Let's get to the point where we could show the relationship between well-being, employee engagement, and customer satisfaction in the programs that we deliver. Wanted to share just a couple quick examples with you around some of our customers and some of the results that they've found. So the first one is a large retail employer who found that by focusing on well-being, they had 79% of their high-risk participants actually reduced their stress, and then 54% improved overall health. We have another one with the state health insurance that found that employees with higher well-being have lower turnover, lower use of sick time, higher job satisfaction, and greater belief in the organization. And then a hospital system that found vacation use was linked to higher work efficiency and employees who are more motivated to do their job. So you can take these kinds of analyses and these kinds of metrics, and you can translate these into dollar amounts. So for example, you could calculate replacement costs for turnover, or you could calculate how improving employee engagement actually has an impact on revenue. So there is a formula created by Aon that says that for every 1% increase in employee engagement, you have a 0.6% increase in revenue. And we have another one of our customers, another example here is a large healthcare product company that we work with, where they modified their program to focus more on whole person well-being, and they found a 1.9% increase in employee engagement just in 1 year. And so for them, that's a potential increase in $3.3 million annually. So there's absolutely ways to take these statistics and convert them to having a dollar impact. We also at Limeade measure these things. So we have dashboards that we've created that align to the Limeade results model. And this is just one quick example of our turnover dashboard. So we can look here and see the relationship between turnover and well-being and how that impacts actual savings. And then we also look to see, we have information around what's driving that in the organization. So statistically, what are the drivers of turnover? We can also look at them by different demographics. Like at the bottom, that's a particular location demographic that you can look to see how turnover risk varies. So there absolutely are ways to measure these things, to track them ongoing, and to find out how you can improve them to help your business succeed. So some key takeaways today. If you want to improve employee engagement, we firmly believe that you should invest in well-being. And when you do that, you should focus on the whole person and really commit to actively supporting well-being in your organization. We also encourage you to measure well-being impact. Don't just stop at program participation. Think about how focusing on well-being could improve the well-being of your employees, but also allow you to get better people results and better business results. So to end, we believe that most progressive organizations, they're going to really understand that caring about well-being, fundamentally caring about people as people, will not only be good for your employees, but it also will be really good for your business. All right. Thanks, everybody. I think we're going to transition now to Q&A.
All right, yeah, thank you, Laura. If you have a question for Laura, please click on the Q&A icon, type your question in, and click Submit. We did have one here come in from William, and William's question is, when you tested your model and assessment tool, how did the pilot organization's CEOs or CFOs feel about not having quantified measures of employee well-being?
So there's a long story to that, because we've been around for 11 years, and we started this before people even understood a lot of these concepts. And so we really had to try to convince people that there was great research out there that said that this is the right focus, that this is important. So where we started 11 years ago was by pointing to the existing more academic literature to show that there really is a relationship between well-being and things like employee engagement and higher levels of productivity and better revenue. So we pointed to the external data first. But as we've been growing and as time has gone by, we've got this really amazing set of data through our well-being assessment. And we've been able to do our own research to show that there are important relationships between these components and these outcomes and results that we might be looking at. We've also been able to partner with other organizations like the one I just showed you. So we've done some individual research studies outside of our well-being assessment to show that these things are related. So we've tested our model for sure. It's an ongoing journey, right? You're never really done when you're seeking to understand something that's this complex. So that's why we created the Limeade Institute, is really to commit to that research and really start to try to contribute to the body of the literature and to just the understanding of the concepts of well-being. So I think there's also just more of an acceptance, thankfully, around these ideas. One of the stories I tell is when we first started this company and we were first trying to convince people of this, we went to a large hospital system and we were just talking about these basic ideas, and the person who was running their wellness program laughed at us and said, "What are you talking about? There's no relationship between stress and physical health." And, you know, that was 11 years ago. And I'm so happy to say that people completely believe that there is a relationship between stress and physical health. In fact, it's very much supported from the research and accepted. So the evolution of the kind of well-being journey and the acceptance that these things are important, again, not just because it feels good and it's the right thing to do, but also because it's important to creating healthy workplaces and places where people actually want to work. So it's evolving, it continues, and I think having a nice balance of, you know, telling stories about people and talking about their own experiences is really important, but I think balancing that with metrics and showing for your organization what really is being impacted by your focus on well-being and how is it helping your company be a better company. So there's a little bit of a combination of, you know, looking at existing external research, but showing it for your own organization too, that I think needs to happen.
All right, thank you for that. We had one come in fairly early in the presentation, and this one's from Wendy. And Wendy's question is, hypothetically speaking, if employees have lost trust in the organization, do you have any suggestions on how to rebuild that trust?
Yeah, it is such a hard thing, right? If you're running a program like a well-being program or really anything within HR, it's not just well-being. If trust is broken, it's hard to do anything of meaning from a people perspective. So really trust and building up trust is probably the place to start. So what I would recommend is, you know, how do you actually face this fact? And how do you get the leadership team to understand that this is a problem, right? And so there's different ways to do that, but sometimes you can use things like employee surveys to get to that data, employee focus groups, for employees to really articulate that they've lost this trust. And so once you can convince the leadership team that it's important, that you have an issue and that it's important, then what do you do? So I would say that it's so important to focus on communication and transparency and being really honest about where you are as an organization and realizing that you're not perfect, and just by not talking about something and pretending like something's not a problem doesn't mean that problem goes away. So I think there's a real kind of ownership at the leadership level that needs to happen, and a real kind of facing employees and saying this isn't working and we need to do something different. And then I'd say involving employees in what that solution looks like could be really important. So I think there's kind of underlying themes of more open communication, more transparency, honesty, and then, you know, trying to figure out for your organization what other things you need to do to start building trust back. And again, remember, the trust goes both ways. So employees need to trust the organization, and the organization needs to trust its employees. So what I find sometimes is we think about it just from the perspective, I'd like you to also think about how do you make sure that you're trusting your employees? Do you give them flexibility? Do you give them autonomy? Do they get to make any of their own decisions? Do they get some choice in where they work, how they work, their approaches to work? It goes both ways when you think about trust.
All right, great. Thank you. We have one here from Bruce. Bruce's question is, what is your philosophy on the use of extrinsic motivation, so incentives, and increased well-being and engagement?
Thank you, Bruce. That's a great question. So this is one of those examples of how our practice in the wellness space goes completely at odds with what research tells us. So there's actually a huge body of research that says as soon as you pay somebody to do something, so as soon as you start offering extrinsic rewards, and especially monetary incentives, as soon as you start doing that, in their heads, they start thinking that the only reason why they're doing the thing that you're paying them to do is because they're getting paid. And it's not because they care about that thing. It's not because they want to have more of that thing in their life, for example, well-being. It's because you paid them to do it. And so what that means is then when you use those kinds of monetary incentives, you don't have sustained behavior change. You have people probably jumping through the hoop to do that one thing you paid them to do, but the kind of main reason why you did that doesn't happen. They don't change their behavior for the long term. They don't end up having higher levels of well-being or whatever it is that you're paying them for. So this is something that's been studied over and over again. It's been studied with children. It's been studied with college students. It's been studied with people in the workplace. And it's just one of those examples of something that we do from a legacy perspective in the wellness space that's just not supported with research. So and believe me, we do it at Limeade. I'm not being, I get that this is something that's been sort of accepted and expected in this space. So what we're trying to do is really think about being more creative, about creating more inspiring rewards in what we think about. So instead of thinking about paying somebody or giving them a gift card, could we think about creating an opportunity for them to go, for example, and meet with customers or do something that they've always wanted to do from a development perspective that they've never gotten to do before. Or even, there's some kind of fun things that are really relevant to the company in question that employees might value. So it's harder than just giving somebody a gift card for sure, but being really thoughtful about creating some recognition vehicle that's really relevant to that organization. So what we do is we really encourage our customers to think more creatively about what it is that we could do to acknowledge and really appreciate participation that's not about just money. So that's a really important, I think, area that this wellness industry needs to evolve and start to think differently about.
All right, moving along. This question comes from Andrew. I think this is a good one here. Andrew's question is, what would you say to leaders in organizations who believe that the high turnover and low tenure is prevalent due to strong competition within their industry, regardless of their investments in well-being programs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish it was just, as simple as that, and we didn't have any responsibility for it as organizations. I mean, there's a truth to that, right? There are some aspects of growth companies having a lot of competition in the marketplace that just makes it hard for those kinds of companies. Usually they're moving fast. There's a lot of things that are changing in order to adapt to that fast-moving environment. So there are things that are sort of natural about that. But at the same time, I think sometimes organizations just throw their hands up and say, well, we don't have there's nothing we can do here, and I disagree with that. I think that there's a lot that organizations can do. And it sort of gets back to the trust components that I was talking about before around really just talking about the situation, talking about what's going on, and acknowledging that it's a hard place to work, it's a hard environment, that the competition is fierce, But at the same time, we want you to be here, and we want to make this a place where you want to come every day, and we're committing to that in these ways. And it won't solve 100% solve your turnover problem, but I think it'll be better. It would improve it, and it would also make it so employees can see the complexity that you're working with. So I think being honest about it, I think having company meetings where you talk about things like that would be really an important step.
All right. We're going to move. This one here is going to come from an attendee named Ninja, and this question is something that we get all the time, and it's about leadership buy-in, essentially. And the question is, I work at a small consulting firm, and we want to introduce well-being as a new important internal topic. How can I best convince the partners that it is worthwhile to give me staffing for that?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I would say I would always start with the business goals. So if you started with what you know your organization is trying to do, so maybe in a consulting firm, is it trying to get more customers? Is it trying to optimize your margin? Like, what is it that from a business perspective you're trying to do? And work backwards from that. Try to understand then what is the role of people in that business goal. And in most cases, it's pretty easy to see that that's not 100%, close to 100% dependent on your talent in order for that goal to be achieved. So then I'm sure you would see that there are some real people issues. Sometimes in some organizations it's turnover, like we just talked about. In other organizations it could be something that's more about kind of people not feeling like their work is meaningful or not feeling like they're empowered to make decisions. So dig into what those people issues are, and again, I'm betting there's a well-being component to that. So I would for sure start with the business goals of the organization and show them how fundamentally caring about their people, supporting them as whole people will help them be more successful from a business goals perspective. And then another thing I think about is what is kind of the nature of influencing tactics for those leaders. So I've worked with lots of different leaders, and I know that for some, it's show me the results, show me the data, prove this to me. And so again, I think you could take, there's a lot of external research out there around how well-being is related to business goals. So you could show with data, prove with data. You also might find that you have leaders who care more about kind of the stories of their employees. So you could look and see with existing employees, some employees who've really struggled, and tell that story of that struggle. Others want to, maybe hear about your own internal data, and maybe there's ways to do focus groups or some surveys to really get to that story of what's happening with your employees. So I think the second piece of this is really about understanding the best influencing tactics for your leadership team and use that. And now if you don't know what those influencing tactics are, I do all of that. I use a combination of a qualitative and a quantitative approach, and that quantitative approach could also have internal metrics and external research support. But I would encourage anybody to be courageous in that and work hard to make that case and convince your leadership team, because it does feel probably like a big, hard thing to do, but I couldn't really think of anything that's more meaningful or important in organizations. So I really encourage you to try.
All right, thank you. This one's going to come from Debbie. Debbie's question is, what tools do you use to assess employee engagement and well-being, and are they self-reported?
So tools, so this is within Limeade. So we have our customers, and we have a set of tools, and we have our own employees here at Limeade. So we use the same tools. We use our well-being assessment, no surprise, to be able to help our customers understand their own levels of well-being and employee engagement. So from the beginning, when we started the company, we knew that work well-being was an important component of well-being. So within our well-being assessment, we have what you could think of as an employee engagement survey. So all of the things that traditionally are considered statistical drivers of employee engagement are in our well-being assessment. So we use that with our customers, and now we have an engagement dashboard that allows our customers to see those results better than they ever have been able to before. So for our employees, we've used that, but we also have a weekly survey question or item that we give out to them. And we actually have aligned our survey questions to the great company model that I was describing to you when I was going through the presentation. So we have the items that are aligned to the great company model, and we call it the Great Company Index. So we have questions that are related to that first piece around investing in well-being. So it's about actual perceptions of well-being, but it's also around manager support and overall whether or not the company supports them. Then we have a series of questions around employee engagement. Then we have questions around turnover and intention to stay, and whether or not our employees think Limeade is a great place to work. So what's cool about this is that we've committed to this as an organization. We have 3 business goals, and this is the third one, is the Great Company Index. So there's a real commitment here to making sure that we are working hard at trying to be a great place to work.
Moving right along here, we have a lot of questions rolling through. This one's going to come from Susan. Susan's question is, with a startup of right under 50 employees, it's been difficult to find a balance between having a great culture and being sure that all moving parts are successful. Susan's CEO is on board with culture and engagement, but do you have any suggestions that you could give for balancing the workload while increasing that engagement?
Yes, I completely hear you on how hard that is to do. When things are moving so fast, how do you actually make sure you're always kind of coming back to what's important? And so there's an approach that we take, and it's about just being intentional with your culture. And I think 50 employees is a great time for you to really solidify that approach. It doesn't get easier as you grow. I think it just gets different, right? It's definitely maybe a little bit more predictable, but then you have scaling issues to deal with. So I would suggest that you think about and look at different models that talk about being intentional with your culture. What a lot of startups, the error that they tend to make is that they focus on fun events as the way of representing their culture. So having parties and serving alcohol and having really great food as a way to represent the culture that they want to have. And that's good and fun, and I get it, but I also would say there's a bunch of hard work that you need to do before that. You need to really sit down with the leadership team and decide what it is that you want in terms of the culture you want to have. The leadership team has to be able to articulate that and say, we need these kinds of people behaving in these kinds of ways in order for this business to be successful. So I think that needs to be created, those kinds of, we call them, you can think about them as values. But then what's really important is getting your employees to buy into that and getting them to help maybe even build it out even more. How do you behavioralize those values in ways that make sense to your employees? So getting clear about what kind of culture you want to have and being able to write it down on a piece of paper and getting your employees to get involved with that process is really important. But then I'd say the next thing, and I could probably talk for about an hour about this topic, so I'll try to make it short. But the next thing I would say that's really important is weaving it into your whole people system. So how do you make sure that those values are included in, a behavioral interviewing guide? How do you make sure those values are included in your new employee orientation? How do you make sure those values are a really important part of your performance management process? How do you make sure they're part of thinking about promoting anybody in the organization? How do you develop people against those values? So that's a really important piece, is to weave them into the whole people system. And then there's about 9 other things that I would recommend, but it's a lot about being consistent and always having those same values show up and have real good metrics around seeing what progress you're making.
All right. Like I said, we still have a lot of them rolling in, so we're going to keep going with this. This one comes from Mark. Mark's question is, regarding the financial piece that you were speaking about, is there any research that you know of that compares the stress level when fiduciary advice is provided versus when it is not provided?
Maybe I don't know about stress levels in the fiduciary. So I don't know if I quite understand that question. I don't know if you can clarify. What I'm assuming is when you, go ahead. Is there any clarification?
No, yeah. Well, Mark, if you could submit a little bit of clarification, maybe we can get to that one here. But we're going to move on to another one. We'll skip over that one for now. So this one's going to come from Leslie, and Leslie's question is, when it comes to organizational change, what types of trends do you see that are related to well-being? And I'm sure you touched on a couple, but that's what Leslie's wondering for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say there are definitely trends in expectations that employers are doing more and more of these things that are related to well-being. And I also think, and I don't have the exact evidence for this, but I think there's also a bit of a feeling for millennials too, that there are expectations that organizations are treating them like people. And in some ways, I feel like maybe millennials just are more likely to have the courage to say it out loud. All of us, no matter what our age is, I think would appreciate organizations that treat people like people. So I think that this is going to become even more prevalent, this idea of, hey, I am not just a cog in the system. I'm not just, here for your every whim organization. I'm a person. I've got other things going on in my life, and I expect you to support me. I have an expectation that you're going to support me as a person. And so I think that there definitely are more trends of this. But I also think more progressive organizations already know this and have been doing it for a while. And it's not always the typical. Some people think that this is like a high-tech, companies that can afford to do these kinds of things, and actually we found that not to be the case. It tends to be organizations that do fundamentally value people in really authentic ways. They're the ones who are already on top of this. They already have whole person well-being approaches. They already are seeing connections with business results. And so I think lots of companies do this, but I'd love to see more of them.
All right. We're going to move along to this next one. This is another one here from Leslie. Leslie's question is, with the ever-increasing virtual economy, what are some of your thoughts or tips related to creating this consistent well-being across a large organization?
Yeah. I mean, that is one way that technology can come in, is the concept of scaling and, not being in a place. In most organizations, you don't sit there with all of your employees. There are usually people who are sitting at your customer locations, working in, really around the world. So how do you do that in a consistent way? And I do think technology helps to serve that purpose, helps you to really scale. So having a technology component of your approach to well-being and engagement is really important. That said, I would never substitute that for real human interaction. That's why we believe the organizational support model is so important, that managers and teams and peers and all those people who are around you, that's just as important as a technology solution. So I think that is one way to scale, is really having a strong technology component.
All right, we have time for a couple more. Or well, you know what? Yeah, we'll take one more, and this one's going to come from Christopher. Christopher's question is, in your research, were you able to correlate the relationship between the manager and the employee in the driving of well-being? And if so, what is that correlation?
Wow. Boy, thank you, Christopher. That's a perfect question. So when we actually had those 8 components in our model, we were really interested in understanding their relative importance, because 8's a lot, right? We did find that all 8 were significant predictors, but which one of those is actually the most important? And traditionally in this wellness space, there's been a ton of focus on leadership. And we know that, and we get that, and we do agree that's important. But what we actually found in our research is that the number one most important driver in our relative weights analysis was the manager. So manager is the most important component of organizational support. And if you think about it, of course that makes sense. As an employee, I know my relationship with my manager matters so much, and how he talks to me about my well-being is a lot of how I really think about it. But I don't also couple that with, we do not do a good job with helping managers support employee well-being. We don't train them on this. We don't help them kind of navigate how you talk to somebody about their well-being but still respect their privacy. And there's a lot more opportunity, I think, for us to do more with managers to help them. The second component of the org support model ended up being resources and tools, having some real tangible way to improve well-being. And then the third one in our model, in our analysis, was leaders. So we definitely agree that leaders are important, but it looks to us through our research that managers are number one.
All right, Laura. Well, thank you so much for that.
Awesome.